Hello everyone, welcome to Multiact final conference. My name is Jessica Fromme and I'm going to be your master of ceremony this afternoon. We have a packed afternoon, very interesting different panel discussion, keynote speeches, and it's all about brain diseases and RRI, responsible research innovation, and the health sector. I'm no expert, so I'm going to let, of course, the experts speak about this subject. I'd just like to know that you're over 150 that have registered for this online event. So whoever's at home or in the office watching, welcome. We're really happy you're there, and we'd also like to let you know that you will be able to interact with the different speakers at different moments. So you can see on your screen that there's a chat box, and you'll be able to comment in that chat box, and at certain moments in the conference there'll be a Q&A. So on the right of your screen you'll be able to click on the interactivity tab and there ask your questions. So I hope you're all comfortable and that you enjoy this afternoon with all of us. So I'd like to present our first speaker, who is Paola Zarrateni, who is the project coordinator for the Multiact. And Paola is going to introduce what RRI is all about. Paola, the floor is yours.
Dear participant, dear partner and stakeholder of the Multiact consortium, as director of scientific research at the Italian MS Society, that is member of Multiple Sclerosis International Federation and of European Multiple Sclerosis Platform, and as coordinator of Multiact projects, I'm really pleased and honored to welcome you all to the final conference of the Multiact projects. The Multiact projects has received funding from European Union under the Horizon 2020 Research and Innovation Program. So today is an important milestone in the journey of the Multiact projects, and we are really honored that you are sharing with us this moment. The project started in 2018 and will end in May this year. So the big and ambitious goal of the Multiact project is to help meeting the challenge of brain disorders. The burden, the incidence prevalence that is huge, the cost, and now the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic. And this call definitely for responsible research innovation, call for new multi-stakeholder, multidisciplinary managerial model that guarantee cooperation and long-term of return of investment, not only economic as the COVID pandemic is revealing. We are fully aware that the European Commission is supporting brain research, but we do believe that to meet the challenge of brain disorders, we need also to enable a unique health research and care ecosystem to address pressing societal need. And the major driver of this change rely on a EU recommendation to really integrate responsible research innovation into the health domain. And the European Commission has been investing on meeting this challenge and has been investing in project portfolio since 2014 to really enable cooperation between science society and to pair scientific excellence with stakeholder awareness and responsibility. So the Multiact project is indeed listed under the project portfolio of responsible research innovation and is expected to produce institutional changes in what we like to name a participatory, anticipatory governance in health research and care, and in particular in public engagement and governance and participatory research innovation governance. So the inspirational principle of Multiact is act like an organization and think like a movement, with the overall goal to increase the impact of health research on people with brain disorder through enabling a unique health and research and care ecosystem through patient participation. And to achieve this ambitious goal, Multiact Consortium has developed a collective impact framework through, I would say, an innovative co-accountability strategy that is translated into new governance criteria, a new impact assessment scorecard, multidimensional impact assessment scorecard, guideline to engage patients across the research and innovation path and to measure impact on outcomes that matter most to them. And all these modeling tools related to collective impact framework is translated into digital toolbox to help the end user to adopt a multi-act model. I'd like to finish my welcome by expressing my gratitude to European community that have dedicated attention and resources to help us meeting the challenge, to the Italian MS Society that is at the root of the inspirational principle of Multiact, to the partner of the Multiact Consortium, and to our project manager, Valentina Tageo. And I like to share the message that the team spirit has been always, that guide us, has been always a hardly open path as to become a highway. And I like to deliver this message to all the stakeholders that have been co-creating with us during these 3 years, the member of our external advisory board, the member of our patient forum, the member of our patient engagement group, and also the initiative that have been co-creating with us. And again, we will deliver this message to them with expecting that they will help us to really turn our Multiact project into institutional changes. I look forward to for our continuous joint efforts in the coming future, and I wish you a successful conference. And Jessica, is over back to you.
Thank you so much, Paola. Thank you for this introduction. It really gives us a clear idea that yes, indeed, it's a consortium, it's 11 partners, and it's led by the Italian Multiple Sclerosis Society Foundation. Thank you so much, Paola. Now I'm going to delve right into the experts. We've got 2 keynote speeches following right now. One that's going to be from René Wachtenberg, representing the European Commission, and afterwards Ralph Lindner from Fraunhofer Institute. Apologies for any mispronunciation. So I'm going to ask René to speak first and then followed directly by Ralph. René, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Pleasure to be with you. Also an honor to be with you with such a broad consortium with excellent experts. So I will give a short talk. I was requested to address especially the COVID issue in the light of open science and responsible research and innovation. So I will start immediately with sharing my screen. So I like to talk in the coming 10 minutes about institutional change for responsible research and innovation, with the subtitle Establishing National and Planetary Public Goods. And you can especially think about the COVID vaccine as a planetary public good, in fact, although currently, as we have seen worldwide, it's at best being established as national public goods. It's relevant for open science and for RRI, and I will go immediately into the subject matter. I will start with a sort of diagnosis in science, which leads us to the conceptualization of open science as a necessary but not sufficient condition for responsible research and innovation. And then finally, I will go into RRI itself. I'm already a little bit helped by Paola's presentation, so I can be a little bit shorter at that part. Okay, I think we face actually two types of crisis in science. It sounds quite bad actually, and probably it is like that. Just to quote the two I want to refer to. The first, it's dubbed the reproducibility crisis in science. And that relates to that a lot of data underlying publications in high impact journals, in fact, already are not reproducible. A recent survey of 2016 by Nature, for example, showed that 70% could not reproduce the data of their colleagues. In another very famous late article of the article of lead article of The Economist, demonstrated, of course relevant also for COVID-19, that 90% of second stage clinical trials fail. Now this has all to do with it has to do with many aspects, but one of the important aspects is, of course, that science has become too competitive and also too closed. Data are shared at a very late stage, so that the data verification by colleagues in the world, around the world, by other experts, get at a very late stage, and this is why data generally are not so robust, and this is why a lot of information actually, even in high impact journals. I heard from the former editor of Nature, for example, that 60% of the articles appearing in Nature have data underlying its publications and cannot be reproduced. So this is quite dramatic. It's connected with another type of crisis, very important for RRI. I call it the productivity crisis in science, and that has to do that the amount of money we invest in science disproportionately relates now to the type of outcomes we want to actually get out of science and innovation. We see that we have to ever spend more in order to get something out of science and innovation which is relevant. So you can see here just an example, a quote from the situation in the US concerning the amount of drugs becoming available. We all know that the major diseases in the world, for example, malaria, which affects the most people on Earth, is not being addressed by the big pharma industry. Equally, we have hardly seen new antibiotics appearing the last 20 years on the market, although it's badly needed. It's one of the main killers of humanity at this time. So this gives us again another picture that science is actually not driving us to the type of outputs we would like to get out of science and innovation. Ever more negative. Again, this has to do with either a too competitive science and also a too closed science. And this has led to the event of the promotion of open science, which is both driven by bottom up, by scientists itself. In the case of COVID, we see it as a sort of moral act, as we saw before with, for example, Ebola and Zika, that scientists started to share the data immediately. Even I think Chinese scientists share the data on the genetic makeup of the virus within a couple of days worldwide. These are unprecedented things, but these are actually necessary for the operation of science in a good way. Now, I shortly will represent the rationale of open science, which is in fact rather simple. I have defined it in the recent handbook which came out on responsible innovation, from which I'm the main editor. as follows. Sharing knowledge and data as early as possible in the process in open collaboration with all relevant knowledge actors. So open science has actually two elements, openness to knowledge sources, so open access to publications, for example, and also to data, but also openness towards other actors. So it's openness to actors and openness to knowledge sources. This is a representation, the inner circle of the scientific research cycle, normally starting with a research agenda, leading to scientific discovery and analysis, subsequently followed by review and knowledge dissemination, for example, by publications. Now, all these aspects of the research cycle have been progressively opened up in the event of open science. So both in terms of openness to actors and to sources. So the upper part, of course, relates especially to the outputs, so open knowledge sources, not just publications, but also data, samples, images, you name it. And of course, also openness to agenda setting. This is especially a step up to RRI, which we also now will see in the Multiact consortium work, where you have what I would call a knowledge coalition of different actors who can jointly commit themselves to a research agenda and drive science and research towards desirable objectives. So this is very short the rationale of open science. Now we have seen now in the event of COVID that this is an extremely successful way of doing science, of course, and also a necessary way. Imagine if we would not have opened up at least the part to the resources and knowledge outputs in terms of COVID, we would not have had a vaccine so quickly. Now, so open science makes science, of course, more efficient, also more reliable. It helps to address the reproducibility crisis because of better verification, but also it will become more responsive to societal challenges. The question is, of course, why we only do it in the case of emergencies like COVID or Ebola and not apply it to all sustainable development goals, or more precisely, when public goods are at stake. Now, there's a reason for it, and this relates to the first part of which we need institutional change, and this concerns the rewards and incentive system in science. We practice closed science, a competitive science, which is mainly aimed at establishing individual prestige, as it says, perhaps, exemplified by the Nobel Prize winners, for example. It seems as if it's individuals who do the creative work and who are doing outstanding things in achieving excellence. Now, the motivation seems very often to publish in high impact journals, to have sexy results. Nature, for example, if you want to publish in that, the editorial board will select on what they think is interesting, and this narrows down, of course, the focus of science dramatically. You have to have endurance as well. Only 7% of submissions are in fact published. For citations, you actually have to wait because the process takes very long. So it may all be motivated by scientists to step up in a career. Maybe they wish to go to Princeton. But practicing open science follows another rationale. It follows by establishing a network, for example, like done in the Multiact conference, and it's community and collaboration driven. Science by nature has to be collaborative in order to be successful. The major successes in science are the results of collaboration, and even Nobel Prize winners normally refer to the fact that if they are rewarded, they have done so thanks to an enormous cooperation with others. So the focus, of course, here is differently. It is a motivation of addressing societal challenges, be it COVID or sustainable development goals in general. This leads to a different rationale. It means, of course, you have to, instead of publishing as fast as possible, it's about sharing and publishing as early as possible. And that means that the productivity crisis I refer to is lifted by a better form of collaboration, which actually now holds up science and also drives science not to the things we want actually to get out of science. So you will also see that if you practice open science, you will have a much higher and swifter higher and citation rate. If this still interests you, of course, this is only a side effect. This would not be the main motivation to practice science. And you will discover that open science is a growing field. It's bottom-up driven by scientists. It's ever practiced more also at high-profile institutions. So in a certain way, open science is also a necessity. We can think about Human Genome Project as the major example. Their publishing was actually put on hold. You would not publish on the results. You would share data internationally in that context in order to make it work. And if you would not have collaborated in this form, probably the work would still not have been done if it would only have been on a competitive basis. So this means now very shortly that the current system is rewarding individual scientists who compete with each other rather than with collaborate, where excellence has become a very much a self-referential criterion, scientists deciding about science itself. And researchers are incentivized to produce as much as possible, and productivity is defined in terms of outputs and not in successes. So open research and scholarships, of course, wants to reward collaboration and societal impact. It's about, if you don't collaborate, you will not have a social desirable impact, so to speak. And I propose actually to reward scientists in their relative contribution to a particular mission, either with a societal challenge, or it can also be curiosity-driven research. In other words, scientists have to be incentivized in their behavior rather than in their output. And that means a complete different assessment of research and science and a different way of rewarding people. That's the first institutional change we are looking after. We, at the Commission level, we actually try to push stakeholders into this direction. This process goes very slow. Some countries have actually made significant advances. For example, the Netherlands abandoned the journal impact factor. They abandoned all kinds of quantitative metrics and put societal relevance as a main criterion for assessing research. Now, the second part I want to talk about, so open science is the first part actually of RRI, the necessary condition, but it's not sufficient yet. So the sufficient condition for RRI is also that we have to address market failure. We see very often in innovation that we are more subject to change than rather than an agent of change. And RRI has the ambition that we become agents of change. So responsible innovation constitutes a paradigm, a new innovation paradigm. It's not just practice at project level, but it should become a new innovation paradigm which gives innovation a direction. So directionality is a main criteria for responsible innovation. So in order to address this market failure and to become less dependent on only philanthropic organizations like Bill Gates, for example, who funds a lot on malaria and also on COVID again, we have to take actions which address these market failures. I can only give some keywords in this short message to you, but they are all non-legislative in nature, either by establishing public-private partnerships, but also by not employing IPR too early in the process, not abandoning IPR, but certainly not employing it in the research and discovery process. So to conclude, we see that that RRI actually has on its reflexivity level different forms of normative approaches, either referring to the process of RRI, how we do research and innovation, and a normative approach to what we want to get out of it in terms of targets and products, and of course in terms of governance. So my theory is about collective co-responsibility. I can only give it now as key words, but it's actually now practiced also in the Multiact consortium. It addresses public goods. It wants to establish public goods, like we see now with the COVID vaccine. And it is featured by an anticipative form of governance where we don't react only to negative outcomes of science or trying to address risks of new technologies, but where we try to address what we want to get out of it, what we want to anticipate, what type of future we want. So this is typically done in research by co-creation and design. It's a key word now also at Horizon Europe, the new framework program. It's also a key word for the current Multiact consortium. It's featured, of course, by collaborative research, and it's also a mission-driven research where the typical future is not to address a technological challenge, but a social challenge, which means the rationale or mission-oriented research is not something like putting a man on the moon, but driving it to a societal challenge. And finally, innovation, which falls slightly different in logic than research. It's all about value-driven innovation. For example, value-sensitive design and innovation management can help us to drive innovation towards social desirable objectives. This also means that what is social desirable is something like Horizon. If you have the objective defined either as an SDG or something else, you will see that if you make your first steps, it retreats like the Horizon. If you come close, it goes away. It means you have to monitor all the time your knowledge during this process. So let me conclude. I want to advertise our book, of course. It's cheap as e-book on Google Play, but even better, maybe my website where you can download all kinds of resources of RRI for free. So I want to conclude here. It's all short keywords. I could not talk too long, of course, and I would like to give the floor now to Ralph Linder. Ralph, the floor is yours. You can take it over.
Okay, thank you very much, René, and good to see you, by the way.
Good to see you too.
All right, so let me share my screen. Okay, so I hope this is working now. Okay, so yes, well, thank you very much to the Multiact team for inviting me to present at this final conference. It's quite an honor, and I'm very happy to be here. Given the tight time schedule, without further ado, I would just start with my short and brief input. In the following 10 minutes or so, I would like to share some insights on RI and its institutionalization in policy and practice. And in many ways, I think what I will talk about does relate to and will in some ways also echo René's keynote. But I hope that looking more or less at the same object of study from different angles and perspectives is will be of interest to you. The underlying rationale is that for RI to be successful, the ambitions of co-responsibility in research and innovation need to be deeply institutionalized, both in RI, research and innovation policy, and in the practices of research and innovation. I think René made very good points on that. So both top-down policy activities and emergent practices coming bottom up from the researchers and activists, they need to come together. And ideally, both perspectives will reinforce and complement each other. So my presentation has two main elements. First, I will provide a contextualization of research and innovation, responsibility in research and innovation in the developments of the broader policy landscape in Europe and over the last decades. And against that background, I will briefly talk about the state of play of institutionalizing research, responsible research and
Ralph,
innovation. Yeah,
we are not seeing your first slides.
I see. I just noticed. Thank you, Paola. I'll try again.
This is your last slide, so probably
Yeah.
you need to go back to your first slides.
Strangely enough.
Okay, now it's better. Now it's okay. Now it's okay. Very good. Thank you.
Yeah, sorry about that. Technical difficulties. Anyways, just to mention briefly what I will end with is make a few remarks on how further institutionalization of RI can be facilitated, particularly at the level of research and innovation institutions and practices. Okay, so now it seems to be working. So this is the next slide. So let's have a first look at the policy landscape over that developed over the last decades. The key question here is, why has RI as a policy concept actually been quite successful, and why has it received so much attention? I mean, there are many good reasons to talk about RI and to take it up, but arguably in terms of the policy developments over the last decades, two main developments seem to be particularly conducive for the emergence of RI. First one would be that in the late 1990s and early 2000s, the EU set out to better connect its institutions with European citizens. And here the EC's white paper on European governance, published in 2001, was particularly influential, was a particularly influential milestone, as it attempted to rethink its relations with citizens, and thereby putting stronger emphasis on involvement of stakeholders and citizens. And in many ways, the discourse on participatory governance was reinforced and received strong support at this strategic policy level. And the background of this development was, as so often, a response to a growing crisis of legitimacy of European institutions. And in view of growing distrust of the European Union, including science and research, the EC was compelled to renew many of its governance practices. And this opened the door to better integrate social and ethical considerations also into the European Commission's funding activities. This again provided the strategic backing for activities to rethink the social contract with science and to democratize its relationship with society. And the second, and at least equally broad in scope as the white paper, was a significant normative turn in the rationales of European science, technology, and innovation policy. Since about 10, 15 years, science policy is increasingly being reoriented to address the so-called grand societal challenges, such as health and well-being, climate change, and the many issues related to sustainability. A key policy document signifying this paradigm shift was the Lund Declaration published in 2009. Here, European research was called upon to focus on the grand challenges of our time. This shift was so important because the rationales for policy was now not only focused on innovation for the sake of competitiveness and economic growth, but increasingly being geared towards development of solutions for pressing societal problems. So this chart here provides a very stylized illustration of the most important paradigms of science, technology, innovation policy since World War II. What you see is kind of a sequence of different rationales or justifications for policy interventions in the field of science and technology. During the first decades after World War II, the usual justification for public funding for research was market failure. In the early phases of science, technology, innovation policy, the emphasis was clearly on fundamental science-based research. This was later complemented by more dedicated funding programs focusing on selected key technologies, but in essence, the underlying rationale for intervention remained the same. A next important step was the emergence of systems thinking innovation policy. The rationale here was that if economic development is to be supported, innovation systems need to function better and need to be improved. So the rationale for interventions were not market failures anymore, but more systemic failures. And finally, the now emerging and probably current paradigm is not so much preoccupied with economic objectives, but with addressing societal challenges. The most recent manifestation of this shift are mission-oriented innovation policies, and the rationale for public intervention, for policy interventions, can be labeled as directionality failure or orientation failure, as research and innovation need to be actively supported and in some ways also directed to better address societal challenges. And another noteworthy aspect of this chart here is that we see processes of policy layering. That means that the old paradigms were not just replaced by the new one. Instead, the rationales related and their related policy instruments are often, more often than not, remain in place and continue to exist. So the market failure rationale did not just disappear, but it probably lost some of its relative weight over the last 10, 15 years, I would argue. So bringing this together, against the background of these two key policy streams at the strategic level, which is the ideas presented in the white paper on European governance and the strengthened emphasis on directionality of research innovation. In this scene, I would argue that the concept of RI offered a very good fit to address the objectives of these two policy streams or paradigmatic developments. Because RI offers a lot of normative commitment to integrate societal and public values in research and innovation, and it also has a strong emphasis on procedural issues such as inclusion, participation, and stakeholder involvement. And these things seem to be very interesting contributions to address these policy streams here. Now, turning more to the actual institutionalization from different perspectives, just a quick glimpse at the state of play of RI at the policy level, but also at the level of research and innovation institutions and actors. At the policy level, the picture is, I would say, rather mixed. We see impressive references made to RI at the policy level. In 2014, we had the Rome Declaration on RI, which was officially endorsed by the European Council. And even more important was probably the promotion of RI as a cross-cutting theme in H2020, by which, for instance, also Multiact was funded, and many, many more activities in this field as well. However, in the current and upcoming Horizon Europe framework program, the role of RI seems, at least at first sight, a bit weakened. We'll see how that will play out in the future, but it seems to me that it did lose some of its strength. So the assessment in terms of European policy is rather mixed, as the actual integration or translation of RI into concrete implementation was, all in all, rather poor. So at the strategic level, yes, a lot of things were happening. There was a lot of funding to be observed. At the same time, it was not consequently rolled out across the whole framework program. Similarly, at the level of research and innovation institutions and the actors actually performing research and innovation, the uptake of RI is mixed as well. In a large EU-wide survey of European researchers we conducted a couple of years ago, we found that the awareness of the RI concept was rather low, but at the same time, the survey also showed that the actual support among the respondents in favor of the aims and properties of RI were actually very, very high. So there's a strong openness among European researchers to actually follow the ambitions of responsibility in research and innovation. We also see that already numerous RI-related governance arrangements are in place in many research funding organizations, in many research performing organizations, but in many cases they are not labeled as responsible research and innovation, but they in fact pretty much do the same as RI is actually promoting. So in many ways this could be called de facto RI, even if it's not called that way. So to finish some learnings as to what supports institutionalization of RI and what has been identified as hindering to the uptake of responsibility in research and innovation. Among the conducive factors we identified in a number of research activities in RI are definitely the role of leadership in an organization. That seems to play a very important role. It makes a significant difference if you have an institutional entrepreneur who is dedicated to reach higher levels of responsibility in an organization. Then, of course, external factors play a role as well. If research funders, for example, require researchers to address certain RI issues, this will have effects, and that can be seen in a number of countries where this has been actually been implemented. The incentive systems of an organization need to be in line with the ambitions of RI. And we know that organizations with a certain amount of experiences in, for instance, sustainability reporting or ethical reviews, they also tend to be more open and more ready to include RI related activities into their daily routines. But obviously, there are also barriers and some risks to the uptake of RI. A real challenge is, of course, the issue of overload. RI requires time and resources from the research and innovation actors, and just adding tasks on top of teaching, publishing, and managing the actual research, that won't work. Many scientists express their concern that they do not have the training and the skills to actually perform responsibility or to do RI, things like stakeholder engagements and things like that. And here we need to invest in capacities and capabilities of the research organizations and the individual researchers. And no doubt the great work of the Multiact project, this is clearly an excellent investment in exactly these capacities and capabilities that are needed. Then, as René also mentioned, the current career systems are very difficult to align with the ambitions of RI, so that is definitely an area that needs to be addressed. And there's always the risk of RI becoming a meaningless tick box exercise if the governance arrangement is not carefully crafted. So one final message I would like to emphasize is that responsibility in research and innovation is really context specific. It really depends on the disciplinary area you are looking at and then the application area you're looking at. And it is therefore extremely important that research organizations and the scientists translate the rather abstract ideas and ambitions of RI into their own circumstances. And I would caution against top-down prescriptions of what the focal elements of responsibility should actually be. In short, the research and innovation actors themselves are mostly best placed to determine the specific content of RI in their specific fields. With that, I would like to thank you for your attention, and I'm happy to, if you get in touch afterwards, happy to share some of the material that fed into this presentation. And congratulations again to the Multiact project for the great work. And I would now hand over back to Jessica.
Thank you so much, Ralph, and thank you, René. These were really deep dives into RI. You're clearly experts and leading the way in this field, so really interesting introductions and keynote speeches. So we are all either at home or maybe some of you in the office. I'm in a studio, there's COVID-19, there's a global pandemic, and the next session is really going to focus on that, on the impact or the relevance of RI in the health sector, and also what does this current global crisis mean for it. So of course I'm not going to lead the discussions. I'm going to let our moderator of the entire afternoon, actually, Usman Khan, take over, lead the discussion, introduce the panelists and also the Q&A. Usman Khan, who is Senior Advisor at FIPRA and member of the Multiact Advisory Board. Usman, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Jessica, and good afternoon, everyone. I think we already started. fantastic session. I've really enjoyed it. It's been interesting. I've been involved with Multiact right from the outset, so 3 years. So we're trying to sort of cover 3 years in 3 hours. It's going to be quite a challenge, but we're going to try and do as best as we can. So with no further ado, having heard really very much the sort of why, the what, and the how to give us that sort of platform of what we are talking about with RRI, I've now got a panel of 3 colleagues, 3 experts to come together to bring us up to date. And as Jessica was saying, very much in the context of the COVID crisis, to be able to understand where we're at and where we're likely to be going with RRI. So without further ado, I'm going to introduce colleagues who I think will magically appear on screen. As I'm doing that, I would also say that we would like to encourage those of you joining us to add your own questions as you hear the discussion over the next half an hour, 40 minutes, and you have a link on Slido through which you'll be able to do that. That was shared at the beginning, and I think it will be shared again. So please, by all means, post your questions. And I can't promise that we'll be able to get to all of them, but we certainly intend to be able to do so. So joining us for this first session, we have Giovanni Leonardi, who is a research director at the Italian Health Ministry. Welcome, Giovanni. We also have Robert McBurney, who is from Conquer MS Network. And welcome, Robert. And then finally, Elizabeth Verondi Cantignino from the Merck Group. So 3 speakers who are very much in the right space to be able to talk about this issue. And colleagues, what I wanted to do, just to be able to give you a first question, we've heard very much that why, the what, and the how, but what I want to know is, what does RRI mean for each of you going forward from this day onwards? What does it mean to you? And if I put that first to you, Giovanni.
Well, this is a really a thorough question. In my opinion, RRI is something that involves the society as a whole. When we talk of responsible research and innovation, we are not talking of scientists. We are talking of the society as a whole. And in my experience as Director General for Research and in the Ministry of Health, I know that the research is considered something far from society. It was considered, up to now at least, something far from society. And this was true even within the NHS, because you had all these hospitals engaged in, of course, providing therapies, all these health managers very keen to find new therapy, but also to save money because it is always costly. And so research was always something more, within, in this scenario. This distance brought to, on one hand, to poor commitment by decision makers and public opinion, and on the other, to a tendency of self-differentiality by researchers, because at that point, the scientific community is something aside, somewhat aside. And symptoms, for example, of this gap is, for example, the gap between the target of 3% of GDP that was set for a budget, for its budget in all member states, and the real budget allocated by member states to research. In Italy, for example, it was about 1.4% according to the last figures. So there was not that big commitment in research, we must say. And also, we assisted to a somewhat anti-scientific mood in some parts of society. There is a mood against scientists, and all this. And so this was something that really put aside scientific. On the other hand, we see, and also our speakers, the speakers before us, very well stressed this, that there are symptoms also for the scientific community that sets aside. For example, the assessment system of researchers, which is based essentially on bibliometric indexes, or also the difficulties for citizens to access to research data and outcomes when they need it. So all these are symptoms of this separation between the society and the scientific community. The pandemic has raised the awareness of the importance of research in our society, and this is both for sound evidence-based information that people need today on the risk and evolution of pandemic, and of course for the psychotherapies, but also raised the responsibility of the research community towards the society. The research community was really aware that they had to act together to give replies, to give answers to the unmet needs. And also there was another phenomenon, which was the different branches of medicine putting together. We should not forget that infectious disease, for example, were somewhat neglected in the so-called rich world. There was a stress on non-communicable disease in our countries. And now we discover again infectious disease also in the rich world. And it has been the main focus of research in the last 1 year, but all branches of medicines are united in the fight, both on the search for, I guess, COVID-19, but also for the side effects of this. Let's think, for example, at the neurological effects of lockdown, of the stress for those who had the disease, and so on and so forth. So there is a need today for an RI policy, and I think the pandemic really gives us an opportunity in this.
And thanks, Giovanni. And I think that point that you've made of locating it, you talked about the COVID crisis, and I'll draw you all in on that again shortly. But that starting point to be able to say we're in an age of a lack of trust, lack of public trust, and we know that, and the COVID crisis has brought that to the fore. So I think it's very, very interesting that you anchor RRI in terms of being able to connect with the public about being the legitimacy of research. And that's very much that sort of forward thinking. Is that something that resonates for you, Robert?
Absolutely. I would say that our organization, a non-profit research accelerator organization, was founded about 20 years ago on what were the principles of RRI, and particularly open science. But of course, it's only been the last few years that we have realized that there's a term for describing what we have been doing. And our organization was actually started by an MIT-trained engineer who probably hadn't thought very much about biomedical research, let alone multiple sclerosis research, but he had lived through the early days of the open source movement in software. And when he was diagnosed with multiple sclerosis, he looked at the world of biomedical research and actually found some of the things that Renee had talked about with regard to closed research. And the first activity of our organization back in the early 2000s was to create a biorepository to stimulate research with the requirement that data be returned to a central database from experiments that were being done. And then I guess another major change that stimulated us here in the United States was the formation of the Patient-Centered Outcomes Research Institute in 2010 by the Obama administration. And that really gave an impetus for groups like ours to become, I would say, responsive to the needs of people with health conditions. In our particular situation, multiple sclerosis. And we've been very fortunate to have funding to create a patient-powered research network called iConquer-MS, which has many of the features of anticipatory governance and also particularly lately, participant-driven research. And we'll come back to that when we're talking about COVID-19. And so I think that our organization for the past 20 years has been living responsible research and innovation without having a term exactly to apply to it, except maybe open science and people-powered and terms like that.
And that connection that you say, you know, what you've been doing in a way, sort of almost sort of unconscious competence becomes conscious competence because you have this framework within which to operate. And I think that you know, that really connects well to Giovanni's point of that sort of, and now how are we going to take this as a forward look? We know we have that 2-decade backtrack, and how do we take it forward? Elisabetta, Merck has a very long-standing record of achievement in neurological, in supporting both MS and other neurological conditions. So you must know RRI, it must be sort of part of your mindset. How do you feel you're going to look differently at RRI going forward as opposed to how you've worked with it in the past?
Yes, thanks also. I hope my connection is good because I continue to receive messages. Can my connection, let me know if the connection is not good.
At the moment, we're hearing it perfectly.
Okay, good. I think, Merck is from 350 years, it is like you were a part of pharma, a biochemical. And yes, as you said, I think there are a lot of years of experience, and also my personal experience was in the pharma world. I think, responsible research or responsible innovation, I like to, because are connected, but obviously are also a different area. I think for a company, I think is really, I think as mentioned by the other also, really to take more attention, like what are really the unmet need of the society, I think, and also the challenge. And to be honest, I think obviously the recent pandemic was and is continuing to be an example because the situation is evolving very rapidly. I think it was really, to be honest, also I was directly involved. It was really a great example, not for the pandemic, but for the collaboration. In fact, I think the important things was really for me also the collaboration, because I think as a company, I think, the responsible collaboration and the research is really related compliance, because obviously as a company, we want to maintain high level, but I think really we have a level that we want to do beyond, not only what is the minimal requirement for regulatory, really to try to elevate the standard, to work together to also to elevate the standard, really what are in base, what are the need. And, I said before, several presentation about how we're evolving the research from 45, where we started a good clinical practice. And now I think this one, really all the company, not only my company, need to be involved. And I think for me also another important aspect of responsible research, we mentioned about the unmet need, is also important the society. The impact of the society take also in consideration, I'm working in a global company, in a global position, really to involve in the people are working in the company. And, I'm a researcher, but, there are several levels really to include to take in consideration all the diversity, and also to take not only in the activity where the people are working with us in the company, but also in the clinical trial, really to take in consideration also the gender. There are a lot of discussion of the gender. I don't want to discuss now, but I think we need to take in consideration also what are the needs, what is the change in the society, because as a company, I think all the company in our job, we need to reflect what is the society we are operating in. And for me, is something we need to take a lot of attention, because the society is evolving very, very rapidly. I'm in research in the 30 years, 15 years in the pharma, and I always impressed as the things are moving so fast. We mentioned before about the trust, the communication by digital is really, the digital communication and the responsibility from all the key stakeholders about the communication, it starts to be enormous. What I call sometimes is also Pandora box, and really we need to work very closely. But, the last point for me is also important as a pharma, I think also to take and here is part of the response also of the innovation, take in consideration the impact of our product not only as a product per se, but also the technology we are using for the product. Because specifically now also with the vaccination, there are a lot of discussion about the technology to use, how to sharing the experience, because I know it's very technicality, and the society, as mentioned by Giovanni, is a little bit far from the research, but there are a lot of technicality, also the high quality of product that we need to take in consideration. And I'll close here because I can talk for 1 hour, but I leave it.
No, you brought out so many points, Elisabetta. Thank you so much. And I think the three of you have already connected really well in painting this picture, that there's something that we naturally feel that RRI is something important. We've always wanted to be able to engage with it. And that we are recognizing that there's more need to do that now. When Giovanni, when you were saying about this sort of relationship, this trust relationship with the public, that needs to be sort of revisited and re-energized. And then also, Elisabetta, you're just painting a real picture of the complexity of research and the necessary complexity. This doesn't seem to be anything any of you are trying to resist. You're welcoming the fact that research is more complex, that you need to include a greater range of stakeholders, that you need to have a public face as well as a research face. So that's the welcome element to it. So then to add on, we've already touched on COVID, but to then ask you that we now know as I say, we're still very much in the midst of dealing with the COVID crisis. But even within this first year, we've seen timescales around clinical research shrinking from 6 years to 1 year. We're seeing the way digital, Elisabetta, the way you talked about digital is just transforming healthcare in a way that we always supposed it might do, but suddenly it is doing. So going back to you, Giovanni, what have you felt within your own context within the Italian ministry, health ministry, of the impact of COVID on the way you are approaching RRI?
As I said, it's really a turnaround in a way, because we had really a mission in this year all over the world. All stakeholders, all scientists, policymakers, administrators, firms, everybody had one mission: to get rid of this crisis. And so, of course, this made people work together all over the world. Of course, I don't want to be all positive, there are some things that are not going that good. And for example, the problem of distribution of vaccine is a problem in Europe, but it's a problem all over the world. So this is something that really affects us. So we should think of it now, and also when all things are over, we should think of it. But let's side all, because we cannot afford, we cannot deal with all that is happening. But of course, the approach that the scientific community is leading this research, and the governments are in a way helping, are lagging behind, are not lagging behind, but are helping what scientists suggest. But at the same time, are pretending that things are done in a certain way, that answers are given, that data are shared. I'll give you an example. We, for example, at our ministry, as you know, Spallanzani, which is an institute very famous on infectious disease in Italy, and is a WHO collaborating center. It was the first in Europe to isolate a strain of COVID-19. And this was given for scientific research to all the scientific community. So there were 90 centers or even firms that could utilize this for scientific purposes. And after that, the Minister of Health wrote to WHO to put this strain at the disposal of all also firms that want to develop vaccines. So it was there for free for everybody. And also we get what Robert said about the biorepository. As you know, WHO is working on the biorepository, and this virus was one of the first inputs that suggested this kind of way of acting. So there is a change of mind. Of course, this is an emergency situation. We have to see what happens after, when it is over, if we can really take advantage of what we have learned during this year, or if everything goes back as it was before. I think that always when there is a great turmoil, something changes. I think, for example, we will still go on having these web seminars, as we might call them, also in the future, because I can talk to Robert across the ocean very easily now, and it was impossible 1 year ago because we had to pay for the travel, and it was impossible. Now it's easy. So if this change happens also in the scientific approach and in RRI, I think that it is a great move forward.
And does that mean that you've talked about, absolutely, we're sitting here, we're almost taking for granted the fact that we can bring people together in this virtual setting in a way that we wouldn't have been able to do previously. And then we've looked at, when we've talked about the speed of the, a lot of the environments evolving very quickly. Are you referencing RRI, or is it something that sort of sits in the back of your mind? Do you feel that RRI is fit for purpose within this very changed environment?
Ask it to me?
Yes, sorry, I was just coming back to you, Giovanni.
Okay, of course, there was already something going on, of course, on RRI, but I think there has been an acceleration in this because the commitment is different. Now we have an awareness, because as I said in my first answer, it is not only a matter of responsibility on the part of the scientific community. It is something that has to affect the society as a whole. And there was not this awareness in society, which is now we now know that science is important, is crucial for our life, and this is a common knowledge across people, and this is a major change. Now we have to use this point, this achievement in the future, to build a different relationship between the science and society.
And Robert, are you feeling that then within the Conquer MS network? As Giovanni's talked about, this is a rapidly changing environment. So have you noticed it over the last 12 months?
So it's been rapidly changing, and actually tremendous change. We were very fortunate in the MS community, research community worldwide, to in November 2019 to launch what was called the MS Data Alliance, under the auspices of the Multiple Sclerosis International Federation and the European Charcot Foundation. And it happened, of course, that we were already talking about data sharing at the time that the pandemic appeared, but only just. And so in a way, the pandemic gave real meaning to the MS Data Alliance and what was then called the Global Data Sharing Initiative. And the great advantage of that initiative was that in the early days, different groups were sharing their data, and collectively the numbers, which wouldn't have been sufficient to conclude anything out of individual initiatives, the numbers became compelling on a variety of fronts with regard to the data. At the same, I just want to make one point, at the same time, the Patient-Centered Outcomes Research Institute in the United States awarded a number of networks, patient networks like ours, the ability to develop what is called patient-driven research, which I would distinguish from investigator-initiated research. And we were in the process of developing a comprehensive system for our network, along with other networks, at the time where the pandemic broke. And so it was relatively easy for us to, with the support, to focus our patient-driven, or we call it participant-driven research, which now has the name Our Questions Have Power. We were able to focus that on COVID-19. We generated some early results in collaboration with the Global Data Sharing Initiative, but most recently, we launched Our Questions Have Power. And of course, the question which rose to the top was a question about the effect of vaccines on people who have compromised immune systems, taking different drugs, totally driven from the people who participate in the network. And so I think that the last year, I think we have been living not every element of RRI, but we've certainly been living various components, particularly the sort of from the person with MS or the person with MS and their care or support partners point of view. I might say that many other organizations and researchers have been involved in this as well. But I go back to something that Ralph said earlier. I think the awareness of RRI amongst the research and funding community is not perhaps as high as it could be. And we're trying to raise awareness by allowing complete actions in participant-driven research amongst our community. But there are all sorts of parallel activities that need to raise the other actors in the ecosystem, if you like.
That's good, Rob, and that links again. Giovanni was saying again, let's not overly take everything as being all the positives. Let's also look at some of the challenges. So we're not naive to those. But I think the way that you described it, Robert, that you were using and developing these tools, COVID comes along and you can then use them in relation to COVID to be able to get that sort of rapid response, something like being able to see what the potential impact of vaccines might be on immunocompromised individuals such as those living with MS. You can see that you're able to do that. And I would imagine, Elisabetta, pharmaceutical companies, Merck, I'm sure, absolutely right at the front line in terms of dealing with issues on the vaccine side, but also having the existing portfolios that you're also developing. So again, how is COVID, if you were being asked to just summarize what has been the impact of COVID on what you're doing around RRI, what would you say the answer is?
To me or to whom?
To you,
okay.
Yeah.
But I think I want to mention one point about the digital, because obviously digital for me, there are different levels. As said, I think the communication with the scientific community was more rapid immediately. I don't know better because it's not my work, but I think I always, as Italian, missing the face-to-face contact. But I think it was great to have a possibility really in rapid to have this one for me was unique. And also I like to mention, yes, I was really, to be honest, a big fan about MS Data Alliance collaboration and also.
Elisabetta was just saying that she might have the challenge with the bandwidth, and I think that's now come to pass. So I'm going to, I'm sure you know what it's like. There's a delay, and then she'll come back in again. Let's see if she's
maybe if I remove the video, do you think it's going better?
Well, we can certainly hear you very well now. So let's do that, Elisabetta.
Okay, but this one was my part about the digital. But, you know, again, there are several initiatives. I leave for the rest of the team to maybe mention also how to change the management of the clinical trial, also in the interaction between HCP and patient with digital world, because it was really a big explosion about this one. I didn't mention, but I think also in the concept of patient centricity, how to take care of the patient in the digital world, remote world, because for me it's not only digital. But regarding, you asked for the company for me was, you know, apart of working 12 hours and 14 hours a day for the last year, honestly speaking, it was really, but I think for all the society, was really a great example of a collaboration. I think like a company, a pharma industry really collaborate with different stakeholders. For me, the first impressive things, like also direct competitor, because, you know, there are a competition, we cannot neglect the competitor, the competition, was also working closely in something I said before, also in the manufacturing, because honestly, I think the manufacturing also a lot of discussion now about vaccine availability also due to the manufacturer. We need to collaborate more to make sure that the products are available in the right. But for me, the things I'm really proud, because I was directly and indirectly involved, I think it was really possible, regulatory, company, academics, you know, government, but also patients association, really to work closely together. I really love underline together in develop, design, and also conduct study. I never see study can be in vaccination or treatment, potential treatment for COVID virus, you know, in 15 years of experience in the pharma, 30 in the conduct so quickly and also so well, because I think, you know, with some limitation, because nothing is perfect, but, you know, it was really conducted rapidly. We provide the right answer in the right moment. Obviously, when the answer produced is always too late, but for me, this one is something as a scientific community, really, we need to really to be proud. And I think I close here, because for me, this one was really the most, you know, obviously, I think for me also the important part of, as a company, I think also to evaluate the impact of the company is really maybe it's not only the famous return on the investment, okay, but really also to see, like, you know, the return to the society, your impact in the society. And I think the company, we really demonstrate to be very more responsible in this part. Sorry for the video, and I close here because I want to leave
fine.
it.
It's great that we're able to hear you so clearly, Elisabetta, and the points you make again are excellent, because I think that, you know, you've made the point of the 16-hour days, and I think, you know, we feel that sort of globally in terms of what it's meant to be able to respond in the way that health systems has responded to the challenge of COVID, and I think it has been quite phenomenal. You also mentioned that point of partnership, and isn't that interesting? When Renee was presenting in the first presentation and setting that idea of, you know, people wanting to keep things to themselves, and a little bit of, you know, keeping that sort of, I wouldn't say fame to themselves, but you could see what the challenge that he set out. And then he said, but if you work in partnership, what the positive elements of that can be. And absolutely, you can see that COVID has generated improved partnerships. So that again has linked in to what RRI is about. So we're getting a picture, if I'm correct. It's not a perfect picture, but it's about being able to say it's certainly relevant. It's certainly been relevant to COVID. It's certainly relevant to the ongoing research agenda, but there's still work in progress with it. So we'll need to continue on with that. And I'm just going to dip into questions that we've had, and actually a slightly unfair question, but I'm going to put it up there as Miklos Golofi, and sorry, I've mispronounced that. But Miklos was saying, to what extent is this idea about RRI or the commitment to RRI shared? And he asking in terms of at a sort of level of geography, but also maybe at the level of different stakeholder groups. So I don't want to necessarily get you to name and shame, but I think, you know, if you could say where you feel an example of really good effective practice has been either within a particular geography or necessarily within a particular sort of stakeholder group. And I'll come back to you, Giovanni, in the first instance. And then equally on the other side, where you may say maybe they've still got a little bit of work to do, they haven't gone fully along the path. That's my polite way of phrasing it.
Yeah, it's of course. Well, first of all, RI is not something that you reach once and for all. Okay, it's a process. You know, it's a you have to gain something day by day. So it's really a dynamic process. And so my first answer, what I would say is we are on the way. We are not there, of course. We have to get somewhere. But another thing that I would like to say is that I already stressed, but is that the scientific community is a global network. No, you don't have a scientific community in Italy, in UK, in Europe, in US. It's a global network. It's really, and so this also means that you may have hubs, but there is no center. So everybody is interlinked, and when you understand this, then your mission becomes to discover how you can forge your actions and policies according to the environment made of citizens, patients, researchers, policymakers, institutions, so on. You have to put all this together, and you are just one point in a network. Whatever is your, for example, it is not the center in Italy of research. It is just one point of research network. And so what we have done to go in detail, for example, at the Ministry of Health. But well, first of all, we, for example, joined the EVER network, Ensuring Value in Research network, which, as you know, is a network made of funding agencies that try to have a common knowledge of the importance of the recommendation made by Lancet in 2014, as you remember, on the waste on research. So, for example, the fact that the research has to really answer to patient needs. This is the first recommendation of Lancet. Another, for example, the fact that data should be accessible to all, not only scientists, but also to citizens. So this is, for example, something that we are doing. We have created a data warehouse where all raw data of projects funded by the Ministry of Health are put together, so they are available to scientists or also people that want to see indeed if as a given article with that uses some data, if this data are really usable for others, to repeat the same research, or to use those data to go forward in the research. So this is something that is important. Or, for example, we are also working with our Minister of Foreign Affairs for the UNESCO recommendation on open science. This is another thing that another point of responsibility we want to put together, to share, to go towards IRRI. Also, working with our institutes, research institutes, we have research hospitals in Italy, which are, their acronym is IRCS, Istituti di Ricovero e Cura a Carattere Scientifico. That means research hospitals, so to say. And we have research hospitals in networks, Nexus for oncology, for neurology, rehabilitation, pediatrician, and so on and so forth, in order to have people to work together and to share good practices, because it is not only a matter of science, it is a matter of healthcare. You are in a research hospital, you must have the best healthcare. You must have people that really feel comfortable, feel they are somewhere where they are really taken care of. And so this is something that, in my opinion, is going towards an RRI. And last but not least, I would like to stress, for example, the Multiact consortium. I joined the external advisory board of the Multiact consortium, but it was not, of course, to give advice, because I have little advice to give to people that are engaged every day on these topics. It was really to learn, because when we talk of RRI, the first thing is that we must know how to approach, how to have stakeholder engagement, how to build projects that are co-designed with patients, that are contacted with patients, monitored, where the impact is assessed with patients and other stakeholders. So, but if you don't have the tools, then it is very difficult to do this. It's just as said before our speaker, it's a responsibility wash. So if you want to be effective, you have to learn. And I really want to thank the Multiact consortium, because they gave us the tool, and it is a program that arises within the neurological network, brain network. But I really don't understand why this cannot be applied in all fields of scientific research, and in particular of medical research, clinical research. So really thank you for the great job you've done in these 3 years.
Thank you, Giovanni, and it's very nice for your kind work for the Multiact consortium, and we'll talk in the second session more about Multiact. But you're also able to talk about some of the. It was lovely the way you painted the picture that there's no central hub, as you say. This is a very sort of diverse research network, and everyone trying to do their piece to be able to improve and drawing on RRI in order to be able to do that. So thank you for those examples. We're running out of time. We just have a couple of minutes left. I just want to give time to both Robert and Elisabetta to either give any other points from your own examples on RRI, or equally from that question to be able to put a challenge out to certain stakeholder groups or geographies to be able to step up on RRI. Robert.
So what we're talking about, of course, is cultural change. And this is hard, sometimes impossible, to make cultural change. I think the pandemic has helped us, at least in the MS stakeholder community, the broad MS, to have an impetus. But I can tell you that although we had in place the governance of our network across different committees like Governing Board, Research Engagement Committee, an excellent representative of multiple stakeholders, when it came to put in place this participant-driven research process focused on COVID-19, you have to work hard, and it will take some time, because there's a very important component to this, and that is building trust. And if you don't build trust, cultural change that involves multiple stakeholders won't take place. And I'm delighted to announce that yesterday, as a result of the Our Questions Have Power program and its COVID-19 focus, that we launched a COVID-19 vaccination and MS project for the community worldwide, and with the help of the National MS Society. But I would say going slow, even when driven by a pandemic, is very important to build trust, which is essential to cultural change.
Fantastic, Robert. What a nice message to put forward. And I can hand it over, Elisabetta, you're going to get the final word.
Yeah.
And you've been
I know, or high
Robert.
responsibility. No, but I was excited also to listen all the speaker, and I think also to participate, as a pharma representative to the Multiact. 2 bullet points, if you want, I want to mention, has been discussed a lot as a patient-centered approach. Obviously, I think Robert, you was mentioning, we are collaborating, not me and you directly, but as a company. But I want to reinforce the importance really to create the right instrument. Okay, and we are discussing PRO, maybe in the future also digital. I don't want to open also this box, but also to working from the beginning with patient with the disease, because the silos is really sometimes to the researcher to work in separate. We mentioned to create community between the researcher, it means more the physician, if you want, or what is the definition, but I think we need to have a patient on board from the beginning. For me, is really something important with a code virus experience. We will learning a lot. The second point is also what has been discussed from the previous speaker about to change mentality or behavior. I think also the silos about I think we are human people, and I'm working now in a pharma, but I think we need to create more idea about to work with a social context. And I think I like the concept about the people we receive a prize for the behavior and not only for the result. And I think code virus can be really a good starting point, and I think the pharma can also add this one. For me, is really to educate, also education about, because at the end of the day, human being, the people want to have, some award for what they are doing. And I think it will be important really to change approach.
Fantastic. And look at you finished it precisely when we needed to finish. I'd love to be able to continue the discussion. Absolutely fascinating. It's been really interesting for me and very positive, I have to say. When we're looking at RRI, and I sort of came in, and I think some of the first words I was talking about the complexity of the research process, but I think I'm leaving it talking about the richness of the research process, because you're all very open in terms of saying that RRI is a richer process, is a more beneficial process, that COVID has probably accelerated its both its relevance and its adoption. You're not hiding from some of the challenges. It still needs to be profiled. And Giovanni, as you were saying, we still need things like Multiact to know how to do it once we have the principal commitment to be able to do it. But that recognition that we're on that sort of positive journey, and that if anything, COVID has hopefully helped that process and will continue to help that process. So can I thank you, Elisabetta, Robert, and Giovanni, very much for this part of the discussion. And I believe that now I need to be able to hand back to you, Jessica.
Thank you so much, Usman. Thank you to all the speakers. Indeed, it was a very interesting discussion, and I would say rather positive, although complex, but positive. And there really is a lot of more work to do, and things might really change in the sector. So let's take a break on a positive note. And I'd just like to let you know that we'll come back in 15 minutes. In the meantime, we do have a graphic moderator that's following the discussion. So we'll be showing you during the break on the screen what has been designed so far. And there'll be a short video to also give an overview of what has been discussed right now. So see you in 15 minutes, and then we'll come back to really delve into the consortium and what's behind all of that. See you in a moment. Thank you.
Despite recent breakthroughs in brain research, the translation of these discoveries into therapies for patients living with brain diseases remains a critical challenge. Solving complex challenges that impact people and society as a whole requires effective collaboration with the involvement of all stakeholders, including academia, government, private sector, health foundations, patients, and civil society in general. However, most multi-stakeholder initiatives lack supporting tools to foster participation of all stakeholders and to hold them accountable for results. The EU-funded Multiact project aims to increase the impact of health research by providing a new collective research impact framework, CRIF, to improve the governance of multi-stakeholder research initiatives and stakeholder co-accountability. What practical tool does Multiact offer to implement its framework? Multiact offers a handy digital toolbox to guide users on the Multiact path towards participatory governance and stakeholder co-accountability. It is a web-based tool with functions enabling smooth navigation through the Multiact knowledge base and material. The toolbox includes a questionnaire that helps assess to what extent a research initiative is already compliant with the Multiact criteria. The outcome highlights which recommendations of the Multiact governance model are most relevant towards the adoption of a participatory governance. A patient engagement roadmap that helps build a strategic stakeholder engagement plan, improve the way a research initiative engages with patients, and assess return on engagement. A materiality analysis tool that invites stakeholders of a research initiative to directly engage in choosing relevant aspects to be assessed in terms of impact in 5 dimensions: efficacy, excellence, economic, social, and patient-reported dimensions. And finally, a master scorecard is provided, which includes a collection of suggested indicators to assess and monitor the impact of a research initiative. It offers 126 detailed indicators covering all 52 identified aspects of measurement. Who can use the toolbox? The toolbox is designed for use by health research funding and performing organizations, or RFPOs, that are currently taking a multi-stakeholder approach to increase the co-accountability of health research or are interested in doing so. How and where can the toolbox be accessed? Free access will be available upon registration together with a user manual directly through the Multiact website. Want to learn more about Multiact? Visit multiact.eu and our social media channels. Despite recent breakthroughs in brain research, the translation of these discoveries into therapies for patients living with brain diseases remains a critical challenge. Solving complex challenges that impact people and society as a whole requires effective collaboration with the involvement of all stakeholders, including academia, government, private sector, health foundations, patients, and civil society in general. However, most multi-stakeholder initiatives lack supporting tools to foster participation of all stakeholders and to hold them accountable for results. The EU-funded Multiact project aims to increase the impact of health research by providing a new collective research impact framework, CRIF, to improve the governance of multi-stakeholder research initiatives and stakeholder co-accountability. What practical tool does Multiact offer to implement its framework? Multiact offers a handy digital toolbox to guide users on the Multiact path towards participatory governance and stakeholder co-accountability. It is a web-based tool with functions enabling smooth navigation through the Multiact knowledge base and material. The toolbox includes a questionnaire that helps assess to what extent a research initiative is already compliant with the Multiact criteria. The outcome highlights which recommendations of the Multiact governance model are most relevant towards the adoption of a participatory governance. A patient engagement roadmap that helps build a strategic stakeholder engagement plan, improve the way a research initiative engages with patients, and assess return on engagement. A materiality analysis tool that invites stakeholders of a research initiative to directly engage in choosing relevant aspects to be assessed in terms of impact in 5 dimensions: efficacy, excellence, economic, social, and patient-reported dimensions. And finally, a master scorecard is provided, which includes a collection of suggested indicators to assess and monitor the impact of a research initiative. It offers 126 detailed indicators covering all 52 identified aspects of measurement. Who can use the toolbox? The toolbox is designed for use by health research funding and performing organizations, or RFPOs, that are currently taking a multi-stakeholder approach to increase the co-accountability of health research or are interested in doing so. How and where can the toolbox be accessed? Free access will be available upon registration together with a user manual directly through the Multiact website. Want to learn more about Multiact? Visit multiact.eu and our social media channels.
Welcome back, everyone. I hope you had a nice break, managed to grab a coffee, make some tea. And now we're going into the second session of this conference. It's all about the multi-act framework. Once again, I'm not doing the hard work. It's going to be Usman that's going to be moderating all the speakers and the entire session. So Usman, the floor is yours.
Thanks, Jessica. Yes, I hope everyone managed to grab a comfort break. We know in this virtual world we run, don't we, between various Zoom meetings to be able to get those comfort breaks. But welcome back. I'm not going to speak for too long. It's because really the hard lifting is going to be done by colleagues who I'm going to be joined with. We're now very much focused on Multiact itself, having looked at RRI, the principles of RRI, where RRI is in the light of COVID. And I think we did that very well in the first half. We're now moving over to understand both the principles of Multiact and also its application. And I think we're all aware, and we know this as a Multiact team, that all we can really give you over these 3 hours is a taste of things. Hopefully we'll be able to incentivize you to spend more time around the website and have more conversations and engage more generally. But it is that starting point. So with no further ado, I am very pleased to be able to welcome Valentina Tegio, who a colleague who we've worked now together for 3 years and more, and she's the project manager for Multiact. And she's going to talk to us a little bit. She's got a couple of slides. She's going to work through around the user journey and the Multiact framework. So over to you, Valentina.
Thanks a lot, Usman, for the introduction. I will just say a few words while I start sharing my screen, which I hope you can see well. Okay, this should be fine. As I was saying, it has been a real privilege to serve this great consortium during these last 3 years, and it's also a big honor to introduce the core results achieved today, although I must say that maybe it's the hardest challenge they gave me in the last 3 years to condense such a bulk of knowledge and results in such a short time. So what we did in these 3 years. We learned already during the conversations, during the panels, that establishing mechanisms for participatory governance and management of health research in a multi-stakeholder environment is a greatly complex topic. It entails, we realized actually that it entails both cross-sectoral issues such as internal ruling, organizational issues, management, sustainability and assessment, which are common to both health and non-health multi-stakeholder initiatives, and of course also typical health domain issues such as the capacity to achieve meaningful patient engagement through all the relevant steps of the design and execution of our research program. So in the first place, of course, we we're departing already from a lot of knowledge in the consortium, but we needed to learn, and we learned a lot through an extensive review about the existing multi-stakeholder initiatives, both in the health and non-health sectors, existing patient engagement methods and tools, and also the state-of-the-art impact assessment framework. And at the same time, we continuously consulted a broad range of stakeholders through surveys, through interviews, through group discussion, and through the interaction with our experts that Paola acknowledged before. This allowed the Multiact team to generate the first version of the key ingredients of the framework, which are the governance model, the patient engagement strategy, and an impact scorecard. And I will show you in a bit, but then you will listen more about them from the partners who developed them. Second, in the second year, we went through a real-life pilot, and we had the chance to test the framework with an existing multi-stakeholder initiative, that is the multiple sclerosis care unit initiative powered by the European Charcot Foundation. And this gave us the possibility to come up with a refined framework thanks to their feedback. So we were then ready to go into our third phase, although I have to say that much of the work had already started quite earlier. And this is when we concentrated on transforming all this impressive amount of knowledge we collected in easily accessible and usable tools through the design of a digital toolbox, first of all, and second, through the compilation of ND guidelines that are aimed to make the user journey as smooth as possible. So let's look together very quickly at how the final product, our collective research impact framework, which we call CRIF, looks like, and what are its key elements. First and foremost, the governance model at the left side of your screen. You will see that we identified 5 key criteria that a multi-stakeholder research initiative, which is mission-driven, should ideally accomplish, which are choosing a shared vision and agenda, set up the adequate rules and bodies, voting mechanism, etc., to secure a participatory governance, adopt a clear and effective stakeholder engagement methodology, of course, ensure proper management and coordination, and last but not least, set up co-accountability measurement tools that can allow to measure impact in a way that allows to account for the return of engagement of all the stakeholders involved. And to deal with this last point, and I'm referring to the right part of the slide, we needed an innovative multidimensional approach to impact assessment. And this is the reason why the Multiact impact scorecard is designed around the key 5 dimensions, which are aimed to overcome the traditional approach focusing only on excellence. We have listened about this before from our experts. So we are recommending the user to choose among a broad range of indicators that are able to capture not only excellence, but also the returns in terms of efficiency, efficacy, which we interpret as adherence to our mission, and of course also social impact and the patient-reported impact. So as you can see, patient engagement comes into the scene in 2 different and complementary parts of the framework. First, Multiact embeds patient engagement in the whole governance process, promoting what we refer to as science with patient impact. And we will listen more about this from my colleague Deborah in a while. And secondly, in the impact assessment itself, because we foster the established use of patient-reported outcomes as a mean to deliver science of patient input. And last but not least, at the bottom of the slides, you can see the legacy to our user, which is the fact that now all of this is available for you through the Multiact digital toolbox, the guidelines, and will be soon also compiled in a comprehensive manual. At this point, I will try to conclude my quick overview, showing you the journey that the promoter of a multi-stakeholder research initiative goes through when they decide to apply the Multiact approach. In the first step, the initiative needs to be profiled through a baseline analysis, which is basically a self-assessment exercise, which allows the promoter to check to what degree their initiative is fulfilling the governance criteria and also deliver governance recommendation to them them on how to improve. This also leads them to refine and agree on a shared mission, which will be like their lighthouse through the whole process. Second, the Multiact toolbox allows to open up to the interaction with the stakeholders and listen from them, performing what is called a materiality analysis, which leads as a third step to the identification of co-selected impact assess aspects that are particularly relevant to all the stakeholders. And with these aspects in mind, the initiative can then design their own agenda, and from the list of suggested indicators for each selected aspects, they can come up with an impact-tailored scorecard, which is specifically suitable to their needs, but it also provides that the balance between the 5 dimensions is always kept. Finally, the initiative can then use the scorecard to conduct their monitoring while it's being implemented. And we can envisage 2 different scenarios, of course. It could be the case that the initiative has a closed end with a clear accomplishment of the mission. In this case, the scorecard is used to measure the final achieved impacts, or instead, if the mission is not accomplished yet, then the initiative will continue in further iteration if the agenda is still valid, or can go back to the materiality analysis and engage again with external stakeholders. And I will now leave to you to ask more about this to our partners.
Thank you so much, Valentina. And I have to say two congratulations. Congratulations on being able to cover that in exactly the amount of time that you were given. Absolutely phenomenal to be able to cover such scope. And also congratulations as project manager for over 3 years. I think what you've been able to achieve of bringing all the colleagues together and being able to get this rich value from the project, I think you also deserve a word of thanks for that. So
thanks a lot.
We're now able to go on to our next part, which is, you'll see, is labeled as in conversation. So we're now moving slightly away from the discussion format. But what we want to be able to do is to talk to 4 colleagues who've been centrally involved in the Multiact process, to be able to understand, as Valentina talked through, those really the richness, again, we use that word, the richness of the Multiact program, to be able to go under the bonnet, if you like, a little bit more and understand 4 elements of it. And we have 5 minutes for each colleague to be able to go through this. So it's going to be quite rapid. And first colleague will be joining me is Deborah Bertoretti from the Italian MS Society. Hi, Deborah, how are you? I haven't seen you in a while.
Hi, Usman. Hi, everybody.
So Deborah, it's a question for you. Is we know that Multiact proposes this participatory governance where patient engagement is such a key element. So why did you believe that this scientific approach to patient engagement was so important for Multiact?
Thank you, Usman, for the question. As we saw from the slide presented by Valentina, core to the co-accountability approach of Multiact are new guidelines to enable science with patient input, meaning to engage patients, including family members and careers, in the governance of research and along its implementation. And it's important to note that Multiact strategy focuses on capturing the experiential knowledge of patients, complementing the existing expert patients approaches that have been mostly used in the last decades. And we are also developing a training on how to capture this experiential knowledge and integrate it into the research continuum. A training that is targeted to all the stakeholders to empower their ability to co-create and to ensure the representativeness of their community. So capturing patient experiential knowledge for us is really instrumental to measure the impact of research on outcomes that matter most to patients. And this make all the stakeholders co-accountable for patient engagement and also co-responsible toward a given transformational mission. In fact, the mission is an explicit driver of the Multiact patient engagement strategy and of the overall framework, as we saw. And speaking of science of patient input, that deals, of course, on measuring the outcomes that matter most to patients, among the co-accountability impact assessment model and its 5 dimensions, as we saw from Valentina, the patient-reported one is a core and transversal dimension. And patient-reported outcomes have been included in the master scorecard of indicators. And also the digital toolbox offers a functionality to collect and analyze patient-reported outcomes. And this is also reinforcing the aspects that are emerged during the panel discussion earlier. So the importance of having also the patient-reported dimension integrated in impact assessment of responsible research and innovation. So I try to be as quick as
you've been incredibly efficient at being able to do that, Deborah. And so saying that it's not just about patient engagement, it's about the breadth of patients, being able to make sure that that's as wide as possible. And then it's about the structure of engagement. And you set that out. So I think, you know, for colleagues who are now listening to that, they'll be able to go onto the Multiact website and be able to be taken on that sort of step-by-step scientific approach to be able to engage effectively. I'm just trying to get a sense of what would you say if I asked you what one particular challenge has been in being able to develop this approach to patient engagement, and how did you get over that challenge?
The biggest challenge in patient engagement is always to ensure representativeness of the community. And for doing this, we need professional management of the engagement. And in this, the Multiact propose innovative boards with innovative function in order to enable the transition from an individual perspective, an individual experience and knowledge into a collective experiential knowledge. So we really acknowledge the importance to having professionals that are really able to translate, to make this transition happen.
Yeah, that really is the crucial point, isn't it? That you do need to be very considered. And I think that's what, giving that time scale of Multiact, you've been able to really think through that process. So hopefully colleagues now will be able to, as I say, make best use of all that learning that you've been able to develop and taking on the thinking in terms of how you involve patients, how you get the patient voice and the patient perspective in all aspects of research. I'd love to be able to speak for longer, because I'm sure there's a lot more that we could discuss. But at that point, I'm going to say thank you very much for that very short intervention, Deborah. That was really helpful. And now I'm going to turn to Luca. Luca Moliani from Ernst & Young. So let's see if Luca comes on the camera.
Good afternoon, everybody.
And there's Luca. Hi, Luca. How are you?
Very good. Thank you.
Good. So you get the very easy part to be able to talk about materiality analysis. And you can talk a little bit about what it is, but we know that it is increasingly viewed to be good practice. But tell us how it was particularly applied in the Multiact setting and to what end.
Yeah, definitely. And so the concept of materiality is widely used from both companies and investors, because really we need to understand just a bit of context on this. We need to understand what materiality really is. And to do so, I would recall the definition used by GRI, that is a Global Reporting Initiative standard used by companies to report on non-financial disclosures. And so that GRI says that the materiality is the principle that determines which relevant topics are sufficiently important that is essential to report on them. So this is what is mainly intended for materiality. But in Multiact, we did much more than that. And so what we did was purposing a collective materiality analysis that allows stakeholders to sign a social contract toward a given mission. And so in this respect, in the Multiact developed approach, stakeholders take an active role in identifying the aspects that matter the most to the organizations, the ones that the GRI would call as relevant. And so this approach that we developed with Multiact gives content of validity to the co-accountability and is instrumental to identify the aspects that matters to all the stakeholders and to find a balance. And it set the basis for design an agenda that is endorsed by all stakeholders to ensure then its sustainability. And in this way, materiality analysis for us, it enables to gather stakeholders' perspectives and to identify the aspect that, as I said, are considered as relevant and having an impact or influencing the decision of the stakeholders. So in this perspective, materiality analysis can be defined as a managerial tool. That's the way we call it also during the Multiact work. We said that the materiality is this tool that makes the bridge walkable between the mission and agenda of an organization and the outcome of this multi-stakeholder research initiative.
And you, again, did fantastic well to be able to describe it to the audience. And I'm coming back to this word richness. You know, this is another aspect of being able to show another dimension, another level of richness that you've been able to bring to the process. I'll ask the same question I asked for Deborah. What did you find any particular challenge in being able to either develop it or implement it? And how did you get over that challenge?
Yeah, sure. So the fact is that this approach is fairly innovative and really considering first action the stakeholders and their opinion. So in these respects, has been a tool that gives sensational results to the organization that are using the Multiact approach. So I guess that the main challenge will be for the organization in order to identify the key and relevant stakeholders, which are then needed to assess and to have this materiality analysis and to gather their response in a way that can be beneficial for their organization. But in order to do so, like we developed the tool that previously Valentina mentioned, so that once the stakeholders have been identified, then there is this digital tool that would allow them to systematically collect their feedback so that this information can be used and be of help for the organization to set their agenda and verify it to the mission of the organization.
And that's giving me a sense of you don't use the word, but almost a sort of return on investment. Why should I as a stakeholder become involved in this process? How do I see that I've added value and I've also got value from the process? So again, a sort of that level of richness, absolutely fascinating to hear. Again, Luca, thank you so much for being able to distill that down in such a short space of time. We'd love to be able to speak more, but we need to be able to now move on, get a new further aspect. So thank you, Luca. And moving on to Michela and Andreas from the University of Trento.
Yes, good afternoon, and thank you for your attention, and allow me to say that I'm very honored to represent here the academic team. And the multidimensional approach proposed by Multiact allows to measure the impact of research on different dimensions, and building on the result of the collective materiality analysis is consequently created in a multi-stakeholder manner. And the multidimensional master scorecard collects the accountability claims of the stakeholder in a multi-stakeholder perspective and shows them their own return on investment and the return on engagement. And this is very, very important and that allow to maintain the stakeholder very engaged over time. And starting from the literature review, we defined the first database of indicators And after a round of structured interviews of key stakeholders, we defined the aspects, and then we refined the master scorecard, getting the final version. This tool is neutral and customizable since it is very flexible, and it is not to be used as a fixed set of indicators. And of course, this is a starting point to be applied and tested and to be tailored to specific projects and initiatives. And this could be a future of Multiact to be extended to other diseases or to other research fields in a proper RRI perspective. And the master scorecard is dynamic and open since it is open to new indicators in the future. And it is usable since it can be used, customized, and applied by a broad range of users. And having 126 indicators, the master scorecard is open to be tailored by the final user for specific initiatives. And it is, of course, comprehensive, being a catalog of core and additional indicators covering a wide range of aspects to assess the impact of health research. And to use it, the starting point of the five CRIFS dimensions, which represent the starting point to define the proper accountability perspective. And then we have 45 aspects, and these aspects are necessary to define the specific assessment perspective of the single user. And finally, as a result, the user will find a core and 2 additional indicators. So at the end, the user can work on a list on 126 indicators on 5 CRIFS dimensions. And of course, the user is not obliged to use all indicators. The selection of 10 depends from the aspects and on the expected return of the user. And at the end, the evaluation of the initiatives is based on a selection of 12 indicators.
Fantastic. Can you, Michaela, can you give us an indication of one of those 126 indicators? What would it be, and how could it be used, and maybe how did it develop as you were running the Multiact program?
Yes, the indicators are both qualitative and quantitative, and they are strictly related to the aspects and the dimension. And these indicators can be used before to evaluate the expected return of a project, during the project, at the end of the project, analyzing the bias from the expectation and the final results. And I think we defined, inside the consortium, we defined the master scorecard allowing all users to be comfortable with the master scorecard. So the user don't need to have a specific knowledge on analysis indicators, but the only one request by the user is to have in mind a clear expectation of its own return of investment and engagement.
Fantastic, and I think that that very much connects when Luca was talking about a management tool, and I think you can see those elements in terms of starting from the patient engagement and then being able to take this materiality analysis in terms of building out with the stakeholders, and then having this master scorecard that you're able to access in the way that you described it. Different stakeholders can access it in different ways at different times to be able to assess how that research process is going. Back to that word again of richness. So thank you so much, Michaela, for being able to describe that. And we're going to go to Sophia as our last of the 4 colleagues who have been centrally involved in Multiact and working on it. And Sophia Chekter-Dio, who from International. And you get the job, Sophia, to be able to talk about that digital platform. It's already been mentioned a number of times, to be able to say, and everyone gets very excited about digital platforms. So tell us how the digital toolbox has been instrumental to enable you to get together this collective stakeholder engagement.
Okay, thank you very much, Usman. Let me summarize what the digital toolbox can do. Of course, it has collected and aggregated all the know-how and all the results that have been produced by all other speakers of the Multiact consortium into an online tool that is self-explainable and guides the user on how to digitally experience and implement the Multiact user journey that Valentina has already presented beforehand. For example, the toolbox enables the user to invite stakeholders to select relevant aspects in the materiality analysis, as well as to track the percentage of responses per stakeholder category. And based on the final selections of all stakeholders, a top list of aspects is then presented by the toolbox. The toolbox is designed in such a way in order to ensure that this top list represents all 4 dimensions of the Multiact model. For example, at least 2 aspects per dimension, and that at least a minimum number of stakeholders has been engaged in this selection process. Now, the final master scorecard that has already been presented is associated to the aspects, since for each aspect, the toolbox presents the relevant indicators. The toolbox has many other functionalities. Another functionality of the toolbox is concerned with the implementation of the digital patient engagement plan that Deborah also talked about, by providing, for example, functionalities for stakeholders engagement, such as submitting comments or contributing to the design of the plan. So we consider that it is actually a multifunctional online tool that will help all relevant and interested initiatives in multi-stakeholder engagement and co-accountability implementation. So, of course, it's now publicly available and can be experienced by all relevant and interested.
And we know that colleagues will go online and will be able to use that. And I think, you know, what the resource that the Multiact is providing for colleagues in research to be able to use. Tell me, Sophia, you were talking about the different functionality. What have you, when you look at it, what's particularly struck you to say that's really useful, it's able to do this or it's able to do that? What would you pick up on?
Well, it has many different useful functionalities, if you ask me, and Intrasoft, of course, that has implemented it. Of course, we will promote each and every different functionality of it. I would more stay on what has been quite challenging in our work, because it is multidisciplinary exercise. And we had actually to discuss a lot and to liaise with many domain experts within the consortium and further from the consortium partners in order to finally implement the respective functionalities in the way that they are expected. So, for example, one quite challenging functionality is materiality analysis, of course, and then engaging all stakeholders in the co-design process for that. This is what I think and find quite challenging and quite interesting. There are the patient engagement guidelines as well, and how recommendations on how the initiatives what steps the initiatives should take in order to comply with the Multiact model. Many different functionalities, actually.
And as you've gone through those, you've gone through very much your colleagues' presentation. So it's allowed those our colleagues joining us to be able to see how those elements are integrated within this digital toolbox. So when they go off and look and explore and decide how they can use it, they've been given a very good sort of introduction to it. So thank you once again for being able to do such a good job of being able to sort of summarize it and distill it down in such a short space of time. So thank you very much, Sophia.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
And when we were designing this, we said we had 20 minutes to be able to do this. And I had my doubts as to whether we'd be able to do it successfully, but I should have realized with such efficient colleagues who really do both know and understand, and really you can see that connection of how much they feel value from what they were talking about. They've been able to distill that down. So that gives us all a sense of what's under the bonnet of the Multiact engine. And now we have a final session which we're going to go back to as a panel discussion, where we'll be talking about how people are actually using this on the ground. How are they actually using the Multiact tool? So on that basis, I'm very happy to be able to welcome, I say to the stage, but welcome to our virtual environment, Graham MacDonald, Giancarlo Como, and David Henshaw. So I think colleagues are now joining us. Here they are.
Good afternoon. Good afternoon, everyone.
With everyone's virtual backdrops, and so welcome to you all. And I'll let you, as you respond to your first question, if you also want to say a little bit more about yourself, your organization, your background, that would be helpful to hear. But what we want to be able to do in this last session is to really understand how can we exploit Multiact. We've talked about RRI, we've understood where it's come from, we've understood its importance, we've taken it through COVID, we've now understood both what the sort of vehicle looks like, and we've looked under the bonnet. Now we want to be able to drive it away. So tell us from each of your perspectives. And if we start maybe with Graham, that, you know, from the International Progressive MS Alliance, an incredibly important part of the sort of wider MS family, because we know in terms of the need to really focus on progressive MS and to be able to make those gains that we've seen in relapse remitting MS. So what do you feel that Multiact is going to be able to bring you and to be able to help you to develop?
Well, let me just start by saying that, describe a little bit about what the Alliance is, because I think it gives context. So you have to imagine this global initiative of patient advocacy organizations from 19 different countries. You have academic researchers from throughout the world. You have healthcare professionals, you have 5 major pharmaceutical companies in it, and you bring in people affected by MS all into this alliance. And in that structure, then you need a way to make decisions. You need to have a way that sets priorities around that. All with the focus on our side to accelerate new effective treatments for progressive MS. And so we have been at a point now where we're really measuring the progress we've achieved as Alliance, but we're also looking at what's changed in the broader progressive MS research landscape around that. And it's time for us to sort of visit and set forth our strategy going forward. And so we've been actively working with Multiact to really think through how do you set that strategy, and particularly for us, how do we do that when we want to ensure that the hopes and concerns and the aspects and perspectives of people affected by MS are heard worldwide. And so that sort of set the stage for our engagement with Multiact.
And now in terms of practice, I mean, and you've set that out very clearly. How sort of important will you now see? Is it something that you will have reference to in the sort of back of your mind, or is it something that will be front and center in relation to what you're doing going forward?
Yeah, it's quite front and center for us now. So we have Multiact as a full partner, particularly in our strategic plan development work, because there's just, I think as other speakers have pointed out, everyone embraces this concept of responsible research and innovation, but the gap has been having a standard process, having a process that's consistent, having a process that's measurable. And particularly for us, we actually had a conference where we just looked at where patient engagement, or in the language we use, is people affected by MS, how do they participate in all aspects of research? And we just found there's just a whole myriad of approaches around the world, but none that were really designed with that sort of thoughtful methodology that we would be able to be repeatable, measurable, that would align to the scientific aspects of those people, to MS organizations, of bringing that together. So this need for an approach really was an ideal partnership with Multiact, because we really wanted to bring in people affected by MS in a more rigorous way, and that meant they needed to be. We need to think how we did that, how we formed an engagement team, the skills and attributes they would need to have, how they would bring more than their individual perspective, but bring the perspectives of many people affected by MS. So the patient engagement coordination team that we've developed through Multiact around that, and then other work that we've just completed with them. We just finished a global outreach to people affected by MS, where we've heard from people from over 36 countries about what they think the research agenda of the International Progressive MS Alliance is. And now we can sort through that and try and find that shared accountability to what we want to achieve and the measures to know if we're on the right track.
Fantastic. And I'm so positive as we come to the end of this 3-hour session to hear that it's absolutely front and center of what you're doing in that crucial area in terms of progressive degenerative MS. So thank you for that, Graham. I'm now going to turn to David Henshaw, chair of the EPICluster. Tell us a little bit about the center, and then again the same question as opposed to Graham, to say how important is Multiact to you, and how, if you are using it, how are you using it?
Well, thank you very much, and thanks for the opportunity to tell you a little bit about our interaction with Multiact, which has been relatively recent. So I'm the coordinator of something called EPICluster, which is a cooperative action that was funded by the European Brain Research Area, EBRA. So they announced a call just over a year ago to basically help coordinating brain research in Europe. And they were looking for sort of large-scale collaborations between existing groups, or in some cases new groups. So where I came into this, I had coordinated a large European project that ended in 2018. And there was a series of these projects in Europe around sort of large-scale epilepsy research. We all came together in a meeting in Brussels to sort of exchange progress and then look a little bit at what was going to come in the future. And as a result of that meeting, and there was about 170 participants from, I think, 20 or 30 different European countries, we decided to try and maintain the cooperation between those different projects into the future. And so EPICluster basically formed around this leadership group. So basically the leaders of each of these European projects, and there's a large clinical care network as well that was part of that. We basically came together as EPICluster. And so about sort of 6 months into that project, we've planned out our various activities. So our first activity was a stakeholder meeting where we tried to bring in new projects in the field of epilepsy that weren't yet associated with EPICluster, as well as try to identify some of the missing people. And it was actually at that first meeting when I think EBRA flagged the possibility of working with Multiact, because they could see straight away that we were missing some key elements in terms of our mission. Because one of the things we all agreed is lacking really in the epilepsy field in Europe at the moment is an organized approach to public-patient involvement in research and co-design of research. So there's a few sort of fragmented efforts, mainly clinically led, but at the moment there's almost nothing in the basic research and the translational space. So I don't think any of us within the EPICluster group had really made any progress towards incorporating this, but we realized that this is something that we needed to do. So after that first stakeholder meeting, we had EBRA put together a meeting with us and Multiact. And Multiact then did a baseline analysis on our cluster, and it was fantastic. I mean, essentially, I was amazed at how good it was in terms of usability, they absolutely nailed everything that was missing from our sort of naively put together consortium, and they've laid out this really kind of clear and easy to follow way to make changes. Now, at the moment, those changes are sort of slow coming, but actually one of the first things we've done is there was some issues around the governance and the representation of stakeholders in that. We've begun to repair that and to improve that. And then the other thing we've done was our third activity was planned to be one particular thing, and we've completely changed it, and we're now going to have it focused on public patient involvement in research and how to develop a really sort of cohesive European approach to this in the field of epilepsy, because it doesn't exist at the moment, and everybody within the leadership of Epi Cluster agreed that would be fantastic. So we're now in the process of planning a meeting, which should be held just before the summer, where we will include a bit of best practice from other brain diseases where they're well ahead of us. And you can see multiple sclerosis is well ahead of where we are as a field. And then try and workshop and be kind of creative around bringing basic scientists, patient groups, representative groups together to talk about what it's going to look like, what we're missing, what people want. And I think I'm a basic scientist, so I know that a lot of us would want to hear from patients, what are the kind of things you want to work on, because up until recently it's always been us driving it, and then some of the things we work on are absolutely no use or no interest to anyone. I think clinicians are better at engaging with patients, particularly around the sort of e-health elements, and that's quite strong in the field of epilepsy, but basic science and translation is, I think, quite disengaged still. So yeah, I mean, I'll leave it there, but so far the support that we got from Multiact has been very impressive. They've identified the gaps we need to fix, and we aim to work on that.
David, that's it's lovely, the comparison between yourself and Graham, two different areas, because I think it's very important to say that Multiact has that. Yes, it has been focused around MS, but it's also about neurological conditions, and then it goes beyond neurological conditions because it's really about engagement of stakeholders in research. And then you both presented about, different, when you're saying, David, coming later to the process and yet still getting a lot of value from it, of both what you're able to modify, but also some things that you're able to sort of set aside and almost rebuild. So very, very positive to hear that, from both of you. So thank you for that. And then Giancarlo Comi, it's very lovely to see you, Giancarlo. We joined virtually in various different guises, and your commitment to the project and your commitment to neurology and multiple sclerosis has been phenomenal. And I would like to just say a huge thank you for what you're doing in the area. Tell us a little bit more about the Chalcott Foundation, and again how you connected with Multiact.
First of all, thanks, Usman, and good afternoon to everybody. Good afternoon, Graham, particularly. We are also together in the Alliance. Yes, the European Charcot Foundation is a non-profit organization that has been promoted by academic people in early 90s. And in the following years, the profile of the foundation has changed. And a very important initiative was started about 10 years ago, that is the FINE multi-stakeholder initiative. And this is really something that a bit anticipated what we have heard today from many different people in this conference. So the idea was that we need to have a bit more comprehensive approach to the problem of multiple sclerosis. The aim of the foundation is to promote research, educational activities. And I think the idea was that the initiative had the possibility not to duplicate efforts, not to waste money, to waste energies, and try to connect together people and organizations that were sharing at least some of the objectives. And one of the initiatives that was promoted from the European Foundation 3 years ago, and that was at a certain point considered the priority, was the MS care unit. Well, MS care unit is a concept born from the stroke units or intensive care units, if you like. So the idea was that it is really fundamental to try to define the profile of organization activity that has to characterize the body that has the charge to follow patient with multiple sclerosis across all the life of the person with MS. So as we know, we have quite different organization in different countries. In the same country, we have a large variability. There are some patients followed individually by one physician, some others are followed by very structured organization. So we thought we need really to find a way to come up with something that is a bit more well organized. And I think at that specific point, I was asked by Paola Zaratin, who was the leader of Multiact, to come up as an external consultant for Multiact. And then as soon as I was exposed to Multiact, I start to think, well, but this is exactly what we need. Because if we want to design the profile of this MS care unit, having in mind which is our aims and where we want to arrive, and knowing that there are so many different stakeholders involved, pharma companies, patients organization, patients, payers. And so, I mean, it was really fundamental to have a much more organic approach, a much better design approach. And here, because we are at the beginning, just in parallel, so we thought we can really have a quite clear co-creation approach and taking advantage, instead to have many errors to be corrected, to try to start with the end in mind. And in this way, I think Multiact was of extreme value for us, because we have been able to try to benefit from designing together the materiality analysis and the selection of the type of aspect to be examined with the master scorecard. So really, we had such a unique opportunity to try to follow together the evolution of the project, having a professional support from Multiact.
Giancarlo, I'll ask all of you the same question, but start with you, Giancarlo. We've got a receptive audience who are hopefully sort of understand Multiact, understand what Multiact can do for them. What would you suggest if they what advice would you give them in terms of how to navigate it, where to where to go first, what to think about if they're using the toolkit? What piece of advice might you give them?
Well, I can just try to answer from my own experience, share with others that are involved. But here, I think the steps that we have already used is the definition of the project itself, the mission, and we come up with a very interesting selection of aspects for the materiality analysis. We are now ongoing an investigation with an appropriate questionnaire of the models of organization of the national MS care units, more generally the modality to deliver the assistance to patients with MS. What to me is now fundamental, not only I think for our own project, but for all the projects, is to try to test the project and to see if with this type of tool, master scorecard and materiality analysis, we may be really able to define for each of the stakeholders the return of investment. And if really we are able to satisfy the 5 dimensions that characterize the investigation of the accountability. I mean, this is a fundamental step, and I think that we need to, and I do hope really that we will have such an opportunity to have another step in this collaboration where we try to validate in practice the approach and the tool that we have available here.
So helpful. I think that idea of the first principles, you know, where is it applicable? Well, it's applicable at first principles. And then when you talk about return on investment, I think we've talked for over the last 3 hours, we've moved from sort of complexity to richness, and that idea of a richness of the research process. And if it is rich and it is involved and it is going to take, you know, patients, those living with MS, other neurological conditions, it takes time, it takes effort. So they need to be able to understand what they're putting in and also what they're getting out. So I think that's really helpful, the way that you said that what Multiact can do is to help those first principles, help set that sort of return on investment framework, so everyone's clear about what they're putting in and what they're likely to get out. Is that something that you'd sort of concur with, Graham, and any other sort of pointers that you'd give colleagues who are on this call?
If I can say, I think this is really fundamental. So think about a very simple point. No one ever asked patients if the model of organization of health delivery for a specific type of disease is the appropriate, is what they like, is what they need. So, and we have been a bit surprised that in our definition of the different aspects, the ones that came first was the patient perspective, was the patient the definition, which was initially surprising because it's not what happened in real life. But I mean, this is again in line with what we have heard early this afternoon. So a shift in the models, a shift where the patient become more central.
Absolutely, absolutely. How does that relate to then, Graham?
Yeah, I think what we've learned is at the Alliance is what's core to any multi-stakeholder engagement is trust. And what does it take to build trust that people are willing to be in for the long haul around that? And it means that they have to trust in the process. And they have to actually experience their voice being heard, being considered, and being reflected in what you're trying to do and what you measure around that. And so I think you have to have a will to do that hard work and to partner with somebody like Multiact. It's new work for all of us. It requires a new approach. It requires more time. It requires discipline. And you just have to make that commitment from the beginning. And I think you have to be prepared that it may change your agenda, and that you have to start with those things in place, so that, but the core is the trust, so that your partners can endure and you can achieve your mission.
And that I have to say thank you. That it's taken us 2 hours 46 minutes to get the word trust in, but I think it's never too late to do it, because I think that's absolutely fundamental. And as I mean, you were saying that as well, David, that things shift, and so if things shift, you need to have that trust. You need to be able to build that trust. And what you're all saying is to have the richness of the structure of Multiact can help you to be able to build the trust, to be able to make the right decisions. So you frame the research in the right way, so it's there to be able to answer the right questions, because I think we all recognize we haven't really got time to answer the wrong questions. We need to be able to go that. I know certainly for progressive MS, but I think more generally. David, further thoughts on that?
Yeah, I find myself agreeing with Giancarlo and Graham in their points, and actually something that immediately resonated with what Giancarlo was saying was around how this framework can be used to measure the benefits of this engagement and to track that. And I think there's probably skepticism from basic scientists as to the value of what that how is this going to change things for me, or why should I be following this? And I think if we can build that in from the beginning, that will be terrific, because we need to prove to people that this isn't a fad, that this is a change and a permanent change for the better in how research is being done. And we can see it in disease areas where they're a long way ahead of us, the benefits. Yeah, so I thought, and also the interfacing idea and the usability of Multiact. Can I just ask, actually, and maybe I should know the answer to this, but what happens next? This is the final meeting, right, with Multiact. What's the next step for the program in terms of support, legacy, and all the rest of it? Or is that maybe that discussion has already happened today?
I think it's an incredibly important point to raise, and I can see Paola on the nodding her head vociferously. I'm not sure, Paola, whether you're able to sort of join us and make comment on that, or whether we'll. Oh, look at that! Magically, our colleagues have been able to bring you in. So, Paola, you have a couple of minutes if you want to be able to talk about that. I think.
Yeah. Thank you for the question. I think that Dr. von Schomberger will really give us the direction for how to, perhaps what is the path forward to Multiact in terms of integrating responsible research innovation model into the into the different domain, because as we heard during the day today, it's very important to give direction, to have a mission and to apply a right principle to the different domain. So, but of course, as Giancarlo said, it would be great to have the possibility to validate, and next should be the validation of a Multiact model, in different else projects, else research projects, such as the one Giancarlo mentioned, or other projects, because of course we need to show the benefit of using this this approach. Of course, I'm fully confident that we will see the benefit, but of course we need to prove it. So thank you very much for this day and for the speaker contribution.
Thanks very much, Paolo, and thank you, David, for asking that question. I think it's important to have, because people will want to know, how do we take it forward, and what further support there will be after this sort of 3 years of pretty intense activity. We've actually now come to the end of this part, and I'd like to say again, Giancarlo and to Graham and to David, thank you very much for your contributions, and also just for that sort of energy and positiveness. I couldn't think of a better way to be able to bring this 3-hour final conference to an end. So I am going to hand back to Jessica. Just before I do, I must just say a huge thank you to Paola, really for your energy and your leadership and your support over the last 3 years. It's been an absolute pleasure being involved in the Multiact process and being able to come in at the end. So, and I certainly say to all of you, go out there and have a look at it and use it. Without saying anything further, I will hand back to you now, Jessica.
Thank you so much, Usman. Thank you for all the speakers. And we would like to also say thank you to you, Usman. You've been excellent in moderating, in really bringing out what was relevant. You talked about trust. There are still a lot of things to learn and to do, but there is trust, and there is clearly a collaboration, Multiact. And thank you for keeping the time. So as you said, it was 3 hours of discussion, and now we're going to have a concluding remarks from Renee, and you'll also be seeing what the graphic moderator has come up with. So Renee, the floor is yours.
This consortium has been successful in translating a key element which I defined in responsible research and innovation almost 10 years ago, namely the mutual responsiveness of stakeholders with a view on a particular social desirable objective. And I found it interesting. I think it was very well explained in a short time by Valentina and Luca that it's not just about stakeholder participation, but it's about a commitment to a mission. And that this mission, of course, in itself can also be subject to review during the process. With that, I have myself still an idea of that ideas of knowledge assessment would be also very important here. What knowledge gaps exist, how do you want to address those, which knowledge you regard as consensual within your consortium, etc. But I think the model is very, very useful and very timely. It seems to me a perfect fit for what we will do, well, actually from May onwards with the Horizon Europe program, which some have complained about in the RRI community, that RRI as a term is not so visible anymore. But in fact, we have translated RRI to a strategic objective of the program itself, which is much more stronger, and it has also a legal meaning. And this has been translated, among others, in what we now call mission-oriented research. And this multi-act model, of course, fits for those missions. The missions we have put in place at the European level, they are huge, of course. There are 6. There are 1 on cancer, on climate change, on healthy soils, on the issue of plastic in the oceans, and so on, where a lot of citizens will be involved. But the multi-act stakeholder model, which was conceived, I think can indeed be used beyond the context you used it in health. I think there are, of course, key elements of RRI, let's say, implicitly implemented in our programs around missions, so co-design and co-creation of stakeholders, inclusiveness, and also a massive input from citizens, or as you have practiced with patient organizations, enormously important. And this actually also, we have referred to building trust, but this is also reinforcing trust to the wider community if you engage with a broader set of stakeholders, and also that we reward scientists in doing so. So this actually will also be done in the next framework program. If you adopt an open science approach, you will actually get a bonus. It will be evaluated under the excellence criterion, and not as an obligation. I mean, of course, as an obligation in terms of open access to particular resources like publications and data, but we will also promote open science practices and open collaboration and engagement with citizens or with patients or organizations as a bonus within your program. So there's a lot of chances for you on the basis also of this model to engage again with the program to get funding. I will certainly also internally distribute the results of this really successful project. It's really impressive because I've been working on the issue very long, but mainly, of course, in theoretical and program terms, in theory of RRI, so to speak. But you have really translated into a very practical and then useful, fruitful approach. So really, my congratulations. I was really impressed. I think. So I think these are my main observations. I think so. The institutionalization, so to speak, of co-responsibility has been very effectively translated in this project, and I think it's a flagship project for further exploitation, indeed, for other areas I mean, of course, it can be used in this area also. Again, we are never finished in research and innovation missions. So I really thank you for inviting me to participate in this conference and to learn from you. And I hope we will remain in touch.
Thank you so much, René, for these closing words. Indeed, it was a fantastic afternoon. We'd just like to also say a big thank you to the Italian MS Society Foundation for leading this and helping organizing the day. I just want to let you know that you were very consistent in following the entire session. So don't worry, we're going to send you recaps of what happened. You can also go on the Multiact website and get all the necessary information. I also would like to say from the studio here that there's a whole team behind organizing this. So there's a number of technicians and managers. So I want to say a big thank you to the team doing all the technical work, and of course to Usman and Paola. And on these words, I'd like to say good afternoon and thank you so much for following us over these 3 hours. Goodbye.